Speaking Human.
Today on Speaking Human, we stare endlessly at the recently redesigned Airbnb logo in hopes of seeing all the strange interpretations that have surfaced on social media. Oh my god! I do see it! It looks like a...
Speaking Human.
Welcome to Speaking Human, the official podcast of Monsters Unlimited, a creative agency with a business brain. I'm Shag Conley, Communications Director at Monsters Unlimited and licensed logo investigator.
And I'm Patrick Jebber, Creative Director at Monsters Unlimited, who has a fondness for phallic logos.
If this is your first time checking out the podcast, our goal on Speaking Human is to simplify complex marketing topics. We toss aside all the buzzwords and mumbo-jumbo to focus on how marketing can bring brands and people together. That's nice. On today's episode, we take a seat on our analyst couch to describe what we make of the new Airbnb logo. And there's a good chance we may end up in straitjackets. So let's get into it.
You need a good logo. Some other people will remember. Well, it's certainly striking, and conversation it's inciting. If it was deliberate, then it's very clever PR. Airbnb, can you not see? Your new branding makes me feel uneasy. Surely there must have been somebody from your creative team who noticed your new logo looks like...
So what you just heard there was an audio clip from a YouTube parody video called A Song About the New Airbnb Logo by Brett Domino. That video currently has over 70,000 views. It's kind of one of many parodies that have emerged since Airbnb rolled out a large rebranding effort, and their new logo, the Bello, became a social media sensation, though not necessarily for all the right reasons. Patrick, can you give us a little bit of background on Airbnb and this controversy that has sparked into a fire?
I certainly can, Shad. A little background. So Airbnb founded in 2008. That's August of 2008. And it's based in San Francisco, California. Airbnb is a community marketplace for people who list, discover, and book unique spaces around the world. So they recently undertook a full-scale rebranding effort based on the concept of belonging. And it includes a new logo called the Bello. I kept calling it Belo, you know.
Maybe it is Belo. I don't know.
Like CeeLo.
Bello. It's only got one L, so it's a good chance it's the Belo.
Yeah.
Belo green.
Belo green. Which they call the universal symbol of belonging. So where Belo belong, I don't know, Bello. Anyway, here are some Twitter responses to the Bello. How many people in Airbnb meetings didn't tell their bosses the new logo looks like testicles? All of them, right? That's one of my favorites. Or somehow the new Airbnb logo looks like every single private part I could think of on either gender all at once. That's actually impressive.
I like the voice, though it changed a little throughout.
Yeah. And then my other favorite was, a tough afternoon for me. I showed someone the new Airbnb logo and was arrested for indecent exposure. So that's a little bit of the feedback.
The Twitterverse filled with comedy. So as you can see, quite a range of responses people had to what started out as a simple rebranding. Before we get too in-depth in that, though, let's just, see where we're coming from here. What's your experience with Airbnb, Patrick? Have you heard of the company before any of this happened? What do you know?
I was telling you this before, a little bit before the podcast. I downloaded the app a while ago, and honestly, I never opened it. It was one of those things where someone was telling me about it and recommended it to me, and it was a free app, and I downloaded it because I was interested in the service. It's basically this app that tells you these different places that you can stay. And I just never got around to checking it out. But I was aware of the company.
Yeah, so you have some reference for it, or somebody had told you about it or something like that.
Yeah. So it wasn't like off the radar entirely.
Well, for me it was. I had never heard of this company. I had no idea what they did. So my first exposure, my introduction to the brand is all this, basically the tweets you were just reading. The media profiles of this rebranding and kind of how it's gone, how socials hijacked it and taken it over a little bit. That's what I know of Airbnb.
Yeah, all the hoopla.
The hoopla, that's it. You see the logo, you see the new logo. You probably heard about it through some news story or something like that, so you got the story first. Upon seeing the logo, what did you think? What was your reaction to it, I guess?
Well, upon reflection, I did see the logo, and I didn't see the genitals didn't pop out at me. Some might go for that's what she said right about now. But not me, Shad, not me.
I'm glad you're above that.
Seriously, I thought the logo seemed well thought out. Seems of the digital age, so to speak, where mobile apps grow and require what I would call further definition of their vision and path. Most mobile apps, they start off and they've got this goal, but they never think down the line, future tense, what are we going to grow to become? And I think that's what they tried to do with the logo, was to really think about their community and how people interpret their service. And the video on the company's blog, I think, did a really great job of describing their thought process and how they came to settle on that mark that encompasses their story.
And we will have a link to the video in our show notes, so you can check that out.
Yeah. What did you think?
I'm kind of on the same page as you. If I just saw the logo straight up, I don't know if I would have had the genital reaction, so to speak, that everybody's talking about.
Nice.
But now that I've heard that, it's all I see when I look at the logo.
Yeah.
In 1,000 different ways, because I don't think there's a clear. It's interesting. The one tweet that was like, it looks like every male and female body part is true. Because you don't necessarily see one thing, but you're like, it could be this, it could be that.
Mm-hmm.
But, now that that's been sort of inceptioned into my brain, I mean, that's it. I just look at the logo and I automatically go there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I'd agree with you. I think they put, if you look at the background stuff, I mean, this is kind of a textbook example of how you're supposed to brand, how you're supposed to think it out. And even if they show how they put the logo together, it's kind of, a combination of heart and people and all these different things that turned into something they could have never imagined. But they really put a lot of time and care into it, and they thought it out, and they have like a strong message there. It's very sincere and heartfelt. It's good branding. It just, had this chaotic, uncontrollable social reaction that kind of happened that hijacked it, basically.
Yeah, you touched on something, like the thought process they put into it. Some key points that I pulled out, I think demonstrates they had a solid understanding of what a logo should be. They made the mark easy to replicate, and it can be drawn by anyone, as they say, which is really important, I think, for them, because there are so many people who might want to make the mark when they're identifying their places and Airbnb destinations.
And that's a good point, too. Isn't that kind of a part of the thing? They want people to put that up in their windows or kind of like somehow notify that they are one of those destinations?
Yeah, and people can use it in different ways, and it's to signify that you belong here, kind of thing.
You're part of the Airbnb community, I guess.
Yeah. The other part that they demonstrated is once it's more widely known, it'll be recognized anywhere. And that's important in any branding effort. You want it to be a simple symbol that people recognize, and anywhere you go, you're going to understand what it is.
Yeah. So it was well done. And if you read that blog and you look at some of the background stuff on where the thinking was and how they came up with it, it's well put together. You can't say anything was wrong with that. Do you think someone there should have caught the genital connection, as I'll call it? You put genital in front of any word, it becomes a strange term.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem because, there's a million logos out there that could have some sort of tie to genitalia. I mean, and once somebody mentions it, you may end up seeing it every time you look at it. There are a lot of people who said that this might have been something, they pointed it out at some point in the process and they didn't care.
Well, I mean, and you see a lot of those tweets are like, how could somebody not see this? How could they miss it? I kind of think it's easily missable for the most part. But like I said, all it takes is one person to implant the thought, and once it's there, especially with social media, the snowball just kind of takes off.
Yeah. And, anytime you're in rebranding effort, I'll tell you, man, there are so many people out there who just like to cause chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever there's rebranding and people change their logos, it's like, open season or something like that on social media. They just really, and in general, social media is kind of that a place you'll find a lot of that comical criticism, I guess.
Yeah. There's a couple things that I really love about when they branded this too that are sort of outside of, the normal rebranding effort, and that is they named their symbol. And I thought that was a really cool aspect. They named it so that eventually when people talked about it, they'd have something to call it other than Airbnb. Did you see Airbnb's logo? They'll talk about the Belo or, like, oh, I saw the Belo outside your place. That's how or Bello, outside of your house. That's how I knew you were one of the places on the app, or whatever. Or essentially humanizing their company and the community it represents. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's something I didn't think about, but it is kind of cool, especially because Airbnb, not the easiest name to say. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue.
Yeah. So I like that they thought through the branding from the people who use the service. They go as far as saying, wherever you see it, you'll know you belong. Who doesn't want to belong, Shad?
I don't know anybody who doesn't belong or doesn't want to belong. I know people who don't belong, but they all want to belong.
That guy does not belong here right now.
It's funny and tragic because it's such a pure effort, and it's like they're not the comical wink wink brand. They're like a very sincere and heartfelt brand that they put together very carefully, and then social media takes over and just turns things upside down. So what do you think? How should Airbnb address this controversy? Like moving forward, they have all this, they're kind of known for their logo being this Rorschach that looks like every part of the human body. What should they do? Should they embrace that? Should they change the logo? Should they change the whole brand? What do you think?
I think they're handling wonderfully at this point. I know that in a lot of the articles that I read, they have not commented on it, but they have put some other efforts out there, like tell your story and that having people, make the symbol themselves. From what I've seen, they've definitely embraced it. Do I think they should change the logo? I say hell no. Stick by it. That shows me that the thought that they put into it isn't a bunch of BS. You know what I mean?
Yeah. This is going to be interesting here. Because I agree with you, and yet I don't.
Let me see.
Yeah. We don't have a lot of, usually we're kind of along the same page, but I don't know. Just given their brand and their messaging, I feel like they got to change the logo.
Really?
Not necessarily like, even if it's just like taking the same thing and like making it a little different. I feel like some way they have this stigma attached now that just doesn't go with their brand and their message. There's some types of brands that have the kind of tone and voice that they could play with it and make it work. I don't think this brand is one of them. I think it kind of undercuts their messaging a little bit. Like I said, for me, I'm going to see that, and now that I know this, I'm always going to be like, there's the genital logo. Look into it. What do you see? Which part? I feel like it undercuts a little bit, and they can use it. They could still use the change as a PR and marketing opportunity, to talk about it. Okay, here was the response. So we did this, we tweaked things a little bit or we changed things around, but maybe rework it a little bit. I just don't see moving forward with that. They're always going to be known as this type of brand, and it doesn't really fit what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I'll come back to you on that because here, so I was reading that one. I don't know if you read that. There's an article out there, and I'm pretty sure we'll link to it. The one guy who commented said, it's a lot like the iPad. And when the iPad, when they first announced that would be the name, that there were a lot of people like, feminine hygiene products and all kinds of stuff. There was like this huge uproar at first, kind of similar to what we're seeing here. It doesn't have any correlation to the success of the iPad. I mean, we say iPad now and we don't ever, nobody even thinks twice about it. And I think that this, just like social media, and we've seen it so many times in the past, that you get this sort of uproar, people creating controversy and chaos, like we said, and then it dies down, and then it fades, and then, they got a lot more publicity probably than they anticipated out of it, but maybe it'll have an endearing quality because people now recognize it. Because I'll tell you, I probably wouldn't have remembered that Airbnb logo prior, even though I have the app. But now, if I see a place out and it's got the symbol on it, I'm probably going to recognize it. You know what I mean? And that might be actually a positive thing versus...
Yeah,
anyway.
And I'm torn on that because then I say, even if you recognize it, is it going to become a positive recognition, or are you going to be snickering at it? Even as the social aspect of it fades, you know what I mean?
Look,
are you gonna see it on a Yeah. Well, are you going to see it on a building and grab the person you're with and be like, take a look at that logo. What do you see? And then be like, it looks like every body part.
Yeah. And
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. You make a good point, and I even, thinking about it for this show, I was kind of torn on where I kind of fell on it, because normally I would say just ride it out, go with it, take the publicity, work with it a little bit. But I don't know, just in the case, especially reading up on them, like I said, they seem like so sincere. They're not jokey. They're not that jokey type of brand who's like, putting out comical stuff all the time. So for me, it kind of doesn't fit. I don't know if that'll hinder them or what going forward, but it just seemed to undercut the messaging a little bit in a way that I would probably consider changing it.
And I bet you they're considering it,
I bet you they've had this same exact discussion we're having right now.
Yeah. They're invested in this symbol that they've created together, and they're like,
I'm sure they're financially invested in it. And one of the people from the company made a good point, you can't control what people are, what people see kind of has more to do with the person than who's putting it out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point.
So, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's it's a great thing to talk about because there are many sides to it, and I can see them all, honestly. So, let's take that then, and, for our wrap up, what can companies learn from Airbnb's unique rebranding experience?
Are you asking me that question? I love how I always ask. Are you asking me? Oh,
yeah,
me?
Yeah.
Can I rate? Oh, that's
Well, I like
cool.
how you're surprised
Every time.
after 20-some episodes of me barraging you with questions. You don't know who they're directed at yet.
Well, I talked about some of the important facets of branding earlier. That the logo or the symbol is easy to recognize, it's easy to replicate, tells your story and where you're going, not just where you're at, but where you're going, and it connects you with your customers. It connects you with your customers. It connects you with your customers. Did I say that enough times? But probably the most important thing companies could take away from this, Shad, is that publicity can strike at any time. Whether it's all about how you handle it, whether it's planned or not, and whether it's good or bad. I think you can embrace it and make it work for you even in extreme circumstances. This is a number one prime cut of steak example of how you can embrace a situation and roll with it, or freak out and be like, oh, what are we going to do? We got to change it. We got to turn it into, instead of 2 butts, we'll make it into 4 butts. People won't ever, then they'll be confused. We'll put a couple dots at the bottom and make it nipples. I don't know. What are we going to do?
They could have just been like, all right, totally embrace it and just have their logo as just 2 naked people.
A great advertising campaign would be to just take a person fully clothed, just standing in front of the camera, and then take their logo and just put it right over top of their special area.
Yeah, that's actually a prime example. That's something I feel like a certain type of brand could pull off. I don't feel like this brand could do it because it's not who they are. Anyway,
they're not a sexual brand. That's the problem.
They're not a sexual comedy brand, which is unfortunate because every brand should be a sexual comedy brand. But good takeaways. The thing I was thinking is you can say this as much as you want. You can't necessarily prepare for anything that's going to happen, especially with social media today. But, you got to look at all possible perceptions when you do a rebranding. I don't know if they got the consumer or even look for feedback on social media before they released it. But those can be good tools to use to kind of get just a little sampling of response that people have, without overdoing it, because obviously everybody's going to have an opinion. I remember there was an old Saturday Night Live skit with Nicolas Cage as the host, and they're like, they're trying to pick out a baby name, and every name his wife would come up with, he'd think of like 1,000 ways people could make fun of it. And that's what you can end up doing if you kind of overthink these things, because it's a little beyond your control. But you do need to get a sampling of consumer response things, which in this case, they probably did, but I don't know for sure.
Focus groups are really important. And like you said, without going overboard.
Yeah. And you can even be post it on your Facebook page or Twitter page, maybe a couple of ideas you're throwing around, give people a little insight into the process. But they had a fully thought out thing here, so I can't really fault them for anything they did wrong on their side. And that's kind of the second thing, which is what you already said. Recognize that there's a part of this, the whole branding process, that's just beyond your control. What they see is not necessarily what you're presenting. You can't control how people think about things or what kind of dirty, dirty stuff they see in your bellow or below. For me, the bellow will always be a symbol of naked people.
Naked people. Airbnb.
And on that note,
that's it for today's show. You can find current and past episodes of the podcast at speakinghuman.com. You can also subscribe to Speaking Human Podcast in the iTunes store.
And while you're, subscribing in the iTunes store, you could also leave us a review, which would be great. We'd love to get your feedback. You can also email us with your thoughts on the Airbnb logo or any other questions or comments at feedback@thinkmonsters.com. That's feedback@thinkmonsters.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Speaking Human. Catch you then, humans.
Speaking human.